Hey, welcome. So today we're going to talk about what is definitely the simplest way, but I would also argue the most effective way to improve your running form, your running technique, especially if you are new to the practice of running. But before we get into it, I literally just have one slide on it here because it's pretty quick. Just want to opine pretty quickly on running technique in general because I think a lot of people have this understanding that there is one right way to do it, and there's not. So the best running technique is really going to look slightly different for everybody. And here I'm defining the best running technique as whatever is the most efficient, meaning whatever is going to cost you the least amount of calories per distance run. Because in a lot of ways, to most people, that is one of the three main ways through which running performance improves over time. The other two aren't really worth talking about today. But I'm not referring to running technique in terms of something like reducing risk of injury because the evidence there just isn't super strong. And what I mean by that is that there's no running technique, one type of running technique that has been shown to be definitively have a lower risk of injury than another. So for instance, a lot of people will live and die by the idea of forefoot striking, meaning that every time your foot hits the ground, it's the front of your foot that hits the ground first. But there are a lot of instances where that's really not going to be that advantageous for you. For instance, if you're dealing with an active Achilles tendinopathy of some sort, active plantar fasciitis of some sort, then landing in that way is going to load those tissues much more greatly, and it's probably just not going to feel too great. I mean, me personally, for most of my running, I'm more of like a midfoot, heel foot striker, meaning more of the middle of my foot, more in the back of my foot, because honestly, I just feel way better that way. I run at a much higher level that way, and I just hate the way that forefoot striking feels. Moreover, what the best running technique is going to be different depending at what pace you're running at. In other words, the how your running technique is going to look, if it's going to look at its best, is going to be very different at a 10 minute per mile pace than it is going to be at a 6 minute per mile pace. So all of that to say that there is no right running technique. There's no cues I'm going to give you, to land this way, to do this with your hips or whatever. That doesn't exist. Instead, what you should be doing is letting your brain learn what is the best running technique for you because it is capable of doing so. And honestly, the real answer to that part is just to run more. But I'm going to expand on that a little bit. So, as I say right here, there are parts of your brain that are dedicated to learning and optimizing movement technique over time because your body is really concerned with spending as little calories as possible and being as efficient with its movement as possible because that's going to give you the best chance of surviving the present moment, which dictates a lot of why things happen inside the body. So this part of your brain will take the input from the rest of your body, make judgments on how good or how poorly it performed, and then optimize that performance over time. But what it needs is that input from the rest of your body. It's not like you can tell it to do that. You need to give that input. You need to give it a lot of that input. And basically all that means is run more. But I'm going to, expand on that a little bit and just say, do more runs per week, but shorter runs per week. So whatever your your mile goal per week is right now, let's say it's 9 miles per week or something like that. Instead of doing, let's say, a 3 mile run and a 6 mile run, do instead a 1.5 mile run 6 times per week. Of course, if your schedule allows for that. I mean, you need to optimize around that first and foremost. But the point is, make your total miles per week as high frequency and as short dose per session as possible. Now, the reason why is that one, like I said, this part of your brain, the cerebellum most specifically, needs a lot of that input in order to be able to optimize the technique the way that it wants to. However, it also has a bit of a shorter memory than we would probably like it to have, especially when it's learning a new task. I mean, and once it knows the technique, it knows the technique. It's really not going to go anywhere unless you don't use the technique for a significant period of time. And this is really where it's like riding a bicycle phrase comes from, because once your cerebellum learns how to ride a bicycle, it's not going to forget. So because it has a bit of a shorter memory than we would like with new tasks, giving it a higher frequency can help sort of off-put that forgetfulness is one way to put it. Obviously, that's a very simplistic way to explain that, but it works for the most part. Moreover, as you run and as you incur fatigue throughout a run, inevitably technique is going to break down. It just happens. So if your runs are higher frequency and less volume per session, and there's less fatigue being incurred in each individual session, then you can argue it's going to get just a little bit higher quality of an input than if you were super fatigued at the end of a 6 mile run or something like that. And honestly, that's really it as far as what my tip here is and why I recommend it. really, again, this is something I would recommend to someone who's a bit newer to running per se. Once you rack up a bit more experience with running, the answer really does just become run more. But theoretically, this technique should kickstart that skill acquisition process, and expedite that learning curve when it comes to your brain learning what is the best running technique for you. Because again, there's no one right learning or running technique for everybody. There is only, what is the best running form technique for you, and that goes as far also to what pace you're running at. And the only thing that's really able to figure out what that is with any level of effectiveness is that part of your brain dedicated toward figuring out what the best type of movement is, the cerebellum. And the only way for it to learn that is to give it the input. And then this approach to the input should just give it a bit higher quality of input as you get started. So hopefully that all makes sense. If you have any questions about anything I said or anything else, feel free to comment down below and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Hope you have a great day, and I will speak to you soon.